I think just as I was, my noble friend sought to ask for clarity, first what I would say is obviously I can completely understand some of the circumstances that people face. As I've said, it's something that we share the concerns that the noble lady is trying to do here. What I was going to say was just it is something that we'll continue to look at and ways of ensuring that people are aware of the information that they're purchasing. And we do continue to look forward to engage with all noble lords in this House. And with that reassurance in mind, I hope Baroness Fox will agree with me that this clause is not necessary, and I respectfully ask that it is withdrawn.
My Lords, I withdraw. This clause is totally necessary, so I disagree with the noble lord on that, but I do understand the need to withdraw. The only thing I just to clarify is that all of the organisations that you run for leaseholders is no good to people who don't know what a leaseholder is when they buy their flat and find out they're leaseholders. You don't think of yourself as a leaseholder, you think you're a homeowner. The only people who call themselves leaseholders anymore are activists who've discovered how awful it is to be a leaseholder, and then they kind of get a different identity. So I think that's what I'm getting at. I also think the government's definition is very good, you should make more of it, which is what the noble Lord, Lord Bailey, said. Why don't you plaster it round a bit? Because it's not fair on first-time buyers. They're the people who've been sold out by this. And you should, you know, I know you don't want to do that, but do something about it. I withdraw.
Is it your Lordship's pleasure this amendment withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to Amendment 85. Baroness Fox of Buckley.
God. Sorry.
My Lords, I'm bored of my own voice too, so bear with me. It's just that I think that this is an important issue. So, what I'm interested in is asking the government through this amendment to bring out a review of the specific leasehold property market for pensioners and the elderly, which I thought would be of particular interest to all of us in this House who might be looking in that market area. To be serious about it, I became interested in the issue after watching a Pensioners Against Leasehold video, which was it's just one excellent example in a series of investigative campaign films produced by free leaseholders. And Jane, who presented this video, made me realise that leasehold is especially devastating for those selling their family home, downsizing into a flat, and then realising that rather than doing the sensible thing, they've potentially bought into a debt trap. And so I've just been talking about first-time buyers. I'm now talking about buyers who are very experienced homeowners, but are buying into a new type of home. For example, Nick from Bournemouth, who's in the film, who bought into a retirement block of 61 flats, who described having a toxic relationship with management agents. And the other reason why I raised this was a friend of mine's mother made that big decision to move later in life into Anchor, whose motto is, later life is for living, and all I can say is, if only. Because what's happened is, having made this big decision to move into a special category of living accommodation, selling up a house, a big decision, suddenly has faced huge service charges, the burden of worry. One of the residents who was facing all this said, we just feel as though that they're waiting for us to die because we've become a nuisance. And somebody else made the point, the whole point of selling up, moving into this retirement home, was because I didn't want the burden of worrying about things, and now we spend all of our time checking on our management committee because they keep ripping us off. So I think there's something going on. Right, retirement properties in Britain are typically made up of individual flats with communal areas, access to emergency health support, and they're almost always sold as leaseholders by builders who then sell the freehold to a management company. These companies are entitled to charge leaseholders fees for upkeep along with ground rent. And I think they're a novel form of tenure that which I'm quite enthusiastic about in some ways. The system, however, is open to misuse, and over recent years there has been a number of scandals suggesting that we need a close look at this sector, and that's necessary because it is taken as a given that retirement homes should be granted exemptions from leasehold reforms in a lot of the discussion, but actually a lot of the problems in the sector are created exactly the same way that leasehold creates problems. Newspapers have been full of tales of exploitation of those buying retirement homes. They're sometimes seen as easy targets, perhaps because they're older, they're suffering bereavement or illness. They certainly see these homes as appropriate for the latter part of their life, and I think that we would be scandalised in any other circumstances if older people were exploited. And I think it's shocking when you hear of some of the scandals. Exploitative service charges and ground rents feel that much worse when it's to the elderly. Families reporting that their elderly relatives have been persuaded to use solicitors proposed by the house builder rather than an independent one to advise them on a purchase. Stories such as retirement home such as a retirement home bought for $197,000 in 2009 from a FTSE 250 company and then sold for $26,000 6 years later. And by the time the flat owner died, she was paying the management company almost $8,000 a year in service fees. The residents who need to borrow against their new home to fund further care only to discover that no bank will assist them because their asset is so depleted in value. Even the story of a resident who was told that she must pay £300 to put up a satellite dish in addition to a £95 annual maintenance fee, even though Sky installs the dishes free of charge. You know, the kind of people who go round and knock on elderly people's houses and kind of rip them off, we have disdain for. But actually, this is happening in a housing sector, and it needs to be looked at. And of course, such stories are giving the sector a bad name. But it's worth noting that Michael Vogue, the Chief Executive of the Association of Retirement Community Operators, ARCO, rebutted his own members' criticism of the media for reporting these scandals, saying, unfortunately, these stories are largely true. And that situation was summed up in the Times in an editorial in 2019, at the end of 2019. It said, if the measure of a civilised society is the way it treats its vulnerable citizens, then our investigation into the experiences of elderly people when they purchase retirement homes from certain developers paints a depressing picture of modern Britain. But the Times notes that this is not just a rebuke of bad practice by rapacious bad apples, that they need to and so on. It suggests that government needs to intervene to regulate, and my amendment suggests that we don't leave investigations just up to the media, but that we actually commission a detailed analysis. And rather than simply revealing scandals, we look at the systemic problems associated with leasehold and this specific part of the housing sector. Governments are already involved in one way, because the noble Lord Best has already done invaluable work in the past in drawing attention to the problem of retirement homes sold as shared ownership, specifically how the private sector developers have received millions in taxpayer grants via Home England towards the cost of building new retirement flats, and some egregious abuses around blocking staircasing and so on. But I assume the government, like many of us, are broadly enthusiastic about specifically built retirement homes. They are, these retirement homes, on paper at least, an ideal solution to downsizing, allowing valuable housing stock to be freed up for new generations and to allow people as they get older to have access to a new community and support while retaining independence and autonomy. At present, including social housing, the retirement sector is around 300,000 units. But as far as I can tell, everyone wants the sector to expand, because living in retirement housing is an excellent option potentially for many older people. Excuse me. And it's why tackling problems should be a priority for us here. We know there's a problem when only 2% of the over 65s live in designated retirement properties in the UK, in comparison with 12% in the US and in Australasia. This figure was noted in an article in This Money entitled "The Retirement Home Scandal is Wiping Out Life Savings," surely a clue as to the barrier to the growth of the sector. Indeed, ARCO has concluded that, quite reputationally, our members recognise that this sector can never grow if we can't offer the customer a product they can really trust. A YouGov poll recently revealed that one of the main impediments for the elderly in terms of buying designated retirement housing is a lack of control over ongoing costs, such as uncapped service charges, and also fear of sudden and unavoidable capital expenditure demands, i.e. our old friend major works that I discussed earlier, recouped from leaseholders. Michael Voves, again from ARCO, explains they want control over these costs, that they are not going to be hit by things like expensive new electronic phones, new roofs or whatever. People do not want to take on that risk. So the leasehold system does not provide what older people really want, which is control over ongoing costs. And I think it's an increasingly important barrier is the fear of causing problems in the future for their families too. Bear in mind that many choose retirement homes precisely because they don't want to be a burden on their offspring. How depressing then if their very decision causes problems for their children post their death. One son, dealing with his father's flat, bought for $163,000 in 2007. When he started selling it in 2015 after his dad died, it took 5 years to sell. Buyers were put off by the extortionate and rising service charges, and it eventually sold for only £30,000. What is more, during those frustrating 5 years, the son had to pay the climbing service fees of £560 a month while still paying his own mortgage. He commented bitterly about the irony of his father putting his life savings into a retirement home, only for it to become a huge financial millstone around his son's neck. But I want to note, I don't want this to be prescriptive about this amendment's review's conclusion. I am perfectly happy to see what we come up with, and I also think that there's lots of positive ideas flowing from the sector itself. There are solutions to this. The LKB and BetterRetirementHousing.com, which has been campaigning for an improved retirement housing sector since 2012, and of course the Association of Retirement Community Operators, have got a brimming full of innovative solutions. And I just think that's what this review should look at, rather than just the problems. I think that we can find a way of solving this. I like the intergenerational ideas of students living with older people. I like loads of these suggestions. I certainly think that we should look at a particular piece of legislation on this, but whatever way we go, there are lots of ideas. This review will be a good positive start to identifying both the problems and how to resolve them. The main thing is that older people are being ripped off, and we are not able to develop a potentially lucrative housing sector because of our friend leasehold yet once more. Let's sort it out and do a review and see if we can come up with something better.
Again, would the noble lady like to move her amendment? Right, okay. Amendment proposed after clause 69, insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list.